Hey everyone, welcome to class. My name is Andrew Lustig. I am your LSAT teacher, your instructor. Thank you to everyone for being here on time, even with the L train shutdown. Now, we had some really challenging problems for homework, and before we go over them, I just want to remind you of something that I said during our first session together. Keep doing the work. Keep trusting the process. Over time, I promise you, there will be moments when the learning clicks. You'll start to notice patterns. You'll begin to feel out an LSAT instinct, and eventually it'll become second nature to you. It might even become fun. So we're going to have some fun today. Okay, that said, let's jump right in to one of the questions we did for homework. You should all have in front of you Logical Reasoning, Section 3, Question 24. Does anybody need a copy? Everybody has a copy? Okay, great. Now, before anything else, when we look at a logical reasoning question, what do we do first? Somebody. Dwight, yes. Perfect. Perfect answer, Dwight. We read the question stem. Why do we read the question stem first? Phyllis. Perfect, Phyllis. We want a heads up. We want to know what we're looking for. Remember, we have a lot of different types of logical reasoning questions. It just helps to go into the question knowing what we're looking for. So let's start by reading the question stem together. Which one of the following principles, if valid, would most help to justify the sociologist's argument? So what do we know? It looks like this is a principle support question. Most help to justify. What does that tell us, Stanley? Perfect, Stanley. It's a strengthen question. We are looking to strengthen somebody's argument. What else do we know about principle support questions? Oscar. Exactly. Excellent. Did everybody hear that? Oscar said that principle support questions fall into the assumption family, for which we can use our 6 guiding questions. So why don't we start with the 6 guiding questions? I am going to move over here. Everybody can see? Okay. Assumption family steps. Step 1, what is my task? We're looking for a principle support. We're looking to help justify the sociologist's argument. 2, what is the author's conclusion? Well, for that, and for 3 and 4, how is that conclusion supported and what is the gap? We are going to go to the actual problem. Sociologist. Romantics who? Now, even with the first 2 words, already I realize that it can get confusing. And remember, this is a question 24. On some tests, this might actually be the most difficult question. So I'm already thinking to myself, Andrew, let's do everything we can to understand who's who and who's saying what. So when I see sociologist, romantics, the first thing I do is I say to myself, I am advocating on behalf of the sociologist, and I separate it. So, romantics who claim that people are not born evil, but may be made evil by the imperfect institutions that they form cannot be right, for they misunderstand the causal relationship between people and their institutions. After all, institutions are merely collections of people. The first thing we really need to do is understand what the romantic's claim is, because the sociologist is responding directly to the romantic. In order to understand what the argument is, what the premise and what the conclusion is, in order to find the gap, I first want to understand what is the romantic saying. So it seems to me that the romantic is saying that imperfect institutions lead to evil people. And the sociologist is saying this is wrong. We don't know exactly what the sociologist is saying, but we know that he is saying not, parentheses, institutions make people evil. So, as we go into our questions, what are we looking for? Like, what kind of answer are you thinking might work? Pam. Perfect. We're looking for something that supports this conclusion. So anything that takes power away from institutions, enough so that it would support the conclusion that they cannot make people evil. We still have a lot of unanswered questions, but right now it just makes sense to jump into the answer choices. So we're going to keep our conclusion in mind that we're trying to support the idea that imperfect institutions cannot make people evil. Institutions don't have this enormous power to make people evil. The sociologist rejects this idea that imperfect institutions can make people evil. It just doesn't work for the sociologist. So we're jumping into our answer choices. Option A, people acting together in institutions can do more good or evil than people acting individually. When I first read it, it's a little much for me. It's hard to fully understand it. But just off the bat, it doesn't work for me. I'm going to give it a pass. I'm not going to X it off immediately. It doesn't say anything definitively. It just says that people acting together in institutions can do more good or evil than people acting individually. But it expands, in a sense, the spectrum. It doesn't tell me one way or the other whether something is possible. So I would move on to option B. Institutions formed by people are inevitably imperfect. Institutions might be imperfect, but that's a far cry from evil, and it still doesn't say anything about their ability to make people evil, one way or the other. Again, remember, it doesn't matter if any of these things are true or not true, if they sound good to us, if they don't sound good. All we're focused on is helping to justify the sociologist's argument. So we move on to option C. People should not be overly optimistic in their view of individual human beings. How does that sound for people? From what I know, I think maybe the sociologist might agree. But again, it says nothing about the relationship between people and institutions. So we move on. A society's institutions are the surest gauge of that society's values. Again, the exact same. For me, even surest gauge of society's values, we're not talking about gauging society's values at all. So we move on to E, and we cross our fingers because we haven't found anything that works so far. E, the whole does not determine the properties of the things that compose it. E is actually very different, and maybe intentionally so, from all the other options. In all the other options, we have the word people, individuals, institutions, people, individuals, human beings, society. We have all these words that keep coming up. And E is completely different. E zooms completely out, and it talks about the relationship between the whole and the properties of the things that compose it. This is the right answer. Why does E work for you? Michael. Perfect. That's beautiful. Does somebody else want to share? Toby. Beautiful. Both of those are right. For me, I'm looking for a principle. A principle is a broad idea that allows something to fit inside. The whole does not determine the properties of the things that compose it. Exactly like Toby said, the institutions for him represent the whole, and the properties that compose it are all the people that compose it. And the conclusion is saying that institutions, the whole, do not have the power to make the pieces evil. And this is exactly what this is saying. The whole does not determine the properties of the things that compose it. The institutions do not determine the properties of the people that compose the institutions. And that works. Starting off with these steps, understanding what the conclusion is, how the conclusion is supported, i.e. the argument, and finding the gap is really, really essential in tackling a question like this. Okay, that was a lot. We're going to take a break in a moment. Does anybody, before we move on, have any questions? Okay. Thank you. Thank you.